All right, welcome everybody. I'm Brian Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon and The Blackest Heart, both published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today I'm going to be reviewing The Integral Trees by Larry Niven. You know, this came out back in 1983. I read this when I was just a kid, like a junior high, early high school years is when I first read this. I was blown away by it. First of all, I picked it up because we always review the covers first. I initially picked it up out of the bookstore because of that banging Larry Elmore cover. I mean, that thing is cool. And it tells you so much about what's inside the novel. Like, we've got these trees, and we'll describe that here in a little bit. But let me first tell you, I met Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle at Dragon Con about 3 or 4 years ago, right before Jerry Pournelle died. You know, Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle collaborated on some of the great science fiction books of our time. And they each had their own solo careers also. But I got lucky enough because my book had only been out a year. My first book, The Forgetting Moon, had only been out about a year, and I had been invited to Dragon Con. And once at Dragon Con, I got invited to this very, very exclusive party of just authors. And it was just a massive party full of all sorts of authors. And I got to sit between Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle, two grandmasters of fantasy. I mean, these guys were contemporaries of Heinlein and Asimov and Ray Bradbury and Arthur C. Clarke and all of the huge, and there I was, just a brand new author sitting at the table right between the two guys. And, you know, unfortunately, Jerry Pournelle passed away a couple months after that, but Larry Niven's still around, still writing books. And I just name dropped, but you know I name drop on these. I name drop like on these videos, so I ain't ashamed of it. What is The Integral Trees about? Okay, we can tell a lot about what it's about just by these covers here. The Integral Trees and the sequel, The Smoke Ring. So what we're going to talk about is just the landscape of the story first. Imagine a sun. Let's just say this is the sun, right? And there's no planets around the sun, but there is what's called the smoke ring, which is a hula hoop size, like a band of air, tens of thousands of miles around the sun, just kind of rotating around the sun. Is like a hula hoop band of air. Like take this crystal ball and imagine a thin hula hoop of air just sort of orbiting around it, just like at 10. You know what I don't know how many miles away from the sun the Earth is, but that's pretty much. But it's not a planet. It's a hula hoop. It's a smoke ring hula hoop full of air. And lots of air, lots of oxygen, really healthy for life. But since there's no land or land masses, but there are trees, it's almost like there might have been a planet there at some point that exploded and just kind of became this band of oxygen and trees and stuff. But the trees, the integral trees, are these trees that we can see in the distance. There's no gravity, okay? So what we've got here are these clumps in this hula hoop band of oxygen. We've got these clumps of foliage that just kind of free fall float. They just crash, bump into each other. They're just and then we've got these integral trees. And I want to explain the trees. We've got a lot of maps in this. I mean, it diagrams what's going on really good in these maps. You know, we've got these integral trees. This is kind of what the trees look like. But let me kind of give you a visual of what these trees are. Imagine that this stick of incense is a tree, and it's got on one end a clump of foliage stuck to it, and we'll just stick that gumdrop right there. So on one end it's got a clump of foliage, and on the other end it's got another clump of foliage. So now we've got this tree with these two clumps of big, huge clumps, like city-sized clumps of foliage. And these trees are massive around. I mean, they're like 30,000, 100 times larger than the redwood trees just in their circumference. And they're spinning in this gas thing of oxygen that's surrounding the sun. Amongst all these clumps of foliage and weird things, these trees, these integral trees, are spinning really fast in that. Spinning really fast, and it's the only place humans could live. What happened was a starship crashed in this atmosphere a long time ago, and it's been forgotten. But the humans still live, and they live in this environment of these floating clumps of foliage and these spinning trees. And they typically live on these trees. And they typically live down in these clumps. And these trees are spinning. And they're spinning so fast that if they venture out onto the trunk of the tree, which they do a lot, to hunt, because there's no gravity. So things like weird birds and weird sharks and birds, just stuff that's living in this oxygen-rich environment that's gravity-free, just floats by these spinning trees. And they go out with harpoons and they kill it. They kill them. And they reel them in, and they take them back to their villages. And their villages are these wicker-made huts that are in the clumps. And some of the wicker-made hunks are actually on the trunk of the tree. And it's very dangerous to go out on the trunk of the tree because keep in mind, this thing's spinning so fast in this oxygen thing. And if they lose, they have to wear hooks. They have to tie themselves in. They have to wear hooks, and they've developed over time, since they've developed like claw-like hands of their own, and their feet are kind of claw-like. So they're humans, but they're sort of adapting to their environment so they can cling to these trees. Because if they let go of the tree and they're not tethered down, well, it just spins them off. It just shoots them off, right? Because it's spinning so fast. You know how things are spinning so fast, it just shoot you off. And so they shoot off, and they're just gone. They're just gone. There's no gravity to bring them back. They're just gone, right? And so that's the environment we're living in. We've just discussed the environment, right? But sometimes what happens is these people, they get spun off. And we find out in the book number 2, that a lot of the people in book number 1 that get jettisoned accidentally, these clumps of foliage and these other many integral trees that are spinning around, sometimes they just end up landing in there. And there's people living in those places too. And so there's a lot of these rival things, they're all bumping into each other at random, in this crazy. And I just thought it was fascinating when I was reading the book as a kid. So I reread it. I had not. If you followed my top 30 science fiction novels of all time, you probably saw that the integral trees here was pretty high up on because I remembered what it was like as a kid. I just reread it. Does it hold up now too? The world building is astonishing. I've never read a story quite in such a bizarre alien world, right? With no planets, just trees spinning through the atmosphere, clumps of bushes, people just floating off into nothingness, weird animals just coming around. And so what happens is the people that living in this clump, they want to travel to this clump. And it's a long journey, folks. Like I said, these trees are massive. It's going to take them a long time to climb. And they do have to climb because things are spinning, right? The closer they get to the center, the less gravity there is really to yank them off. So they climb. There's a group of... The integral trees is about a group of 9 adventurers that decide to leave their home base in the clump, and because they want to go to the other clump, and they climb this trunk of trees, and it hasn't been done before, and they climb, and it's a long journey, and the stuff that they see, the stuff that they find on their journey, living in the tree, because like I said, the trunk is massive, and they're climbing it like it's a big rock wall. And they're just climbing, and they have to sleep on little ledges that they can find in the bark, sometimes they'll find little pools of water that are tucked into the bark, and creatures big and small, friendly and scary, and all of that is these adventures, and they don't all make it, right? And some of the stuff they find along the way is technological, like they find like the things embedded in the trees. And you can see this on the back. We've got the integral trees here. This is an example of what the characters look in their harpoon. You see she's She's tethered, if you can see the ropes have tethered her to the tree, but she's floated quite a way away from the tree, which they do sometimes do to hunt. They'll tether themselves to the tree, then float way away from it to hunt with their harpoons. And then along the backside, you can see the tree has got strange little strange things embedded in it that they find, and then they explore. And gosh, it just gets weird and weirder and weirder as you go. And I haven't even talked about the characters yet, but they're a great cast of characters. I mean, just look. We'll put the prop down. I'll eat that later before the video's over. I swear, it's making me hungry. As you can see, we get characters. We've got some of the weird creatures that float through. We've got, and all the characters are just, and of course, Michael Whelan does such a great job of illustrating this whole thing. You know, I don't know what to say about it other than that. It's just kind of like a quest. It's like one of the most bizarre quests you're ever going to read. If you just saw the landscape that I just demonstrated for you, would you want to live on this thing that's spinning through a smoke ring of oxygen and bumping into other things and bumping into weird animals that are just floating about? And, that's what the characters in these books. And I will reread The Smoke Ring soon and leave a review of that, but I hope I've interested you in that. The characters are bizarro. Because of their environment, they're just bizarro. Like they understand where they're living is not their home. They understand that there were starships at one point and that they've crashed and their ancestors crashed. I mean, they kind of get that they are sort of abandoned in this weird place and that there's other people about living on other things. Like it's one of the most fascinating alien environments I've ever seen an author create. And it gets your heart pounding when they start climbing the tree and they get on their adventure, you know. Anyway, the integral trees, like I said, it ended up in one of my top 30. It was one of my top 30 science fiction books of all time, based off of how I remembered it, the fondness I had for it as a kid. Did the fondness translate 70,000 years later to when I'm adult? I was still fascinated by the environment. The book is thin. I wish it would have been like maybe 400 pages longer, just so I could soak myself into the environment a little more. You know, I love wordy books, and this is not that wordy. This pumps you right into the adventure right from the get-go. It's very sparse with its descriptions. Thank God for the maps and the great cover that Michael Whelan gave us so we could figure out exactly what's happening. But I still give it high marks because my heart was still pounding as I reread this, because I honestly remembered quite a bit of it, even though it's been so long ago that I read it. Let's give this a 9 out of 10 on a reread.